I work at a startup which is quite close to here. We call Converge. You can follow me on Twitter at @thewizardlucas, or Twitter angry things about me, using Emacs. So I came to a JavaScript meetup to talk about how I'm basically not using anything written in JavaScript to write JavaScript, and how I'm still not using GUIs in 2019. So this talk comes from a blog post I've written a few months ago called How I'm Still Not Using GUIs in 2019. Maybe someone here has seen it? Okay, everyone raised their hands? Awesome. So since I've written this, I really wanted to do a talk to explain two of the most common questions. To answer two of the most common questions I get when I tell this to people, and to answer some of the emails I got in a more public fashion. So these questions are why and how. There's also a third question, which is a bit more like, oh my god, why? This is the most common, by the way. And this is the one I would like to start with. Because it might sound weird for someone to come here and say like, oh, don't use GUIs, just use this way of developing software that comes from, I don't know, the 80s, 70s, or from 95, I really don't know. Especially because, we've got so many amazing GUIs these days. Everyone loves that, right? I mean, look at how many buttons you have to click. Fantastic. So it's kind of like, can you imagine when someone came up with books, and then people in Egypt were saying like, actually papyrus is a very good idea, we shouldn't move forward. And you might think, no one will say that, no way. But now comes Hakan News O'Clock, the time of the talk where I read my favorite comments from that blog post on Hakan News. And I'd like to start with my favorite one, in which someone quotes a passage from that text, which says, using the terminal at least makes you proficient with the lowest common denominator of tools. Okay, so I've written this. This was not supposed to be a joke, but it's good that you're laughing. That makes me happy. The real joke comes now. So then they go on to ask, why even use a computer then? I mean, aren't rocks and sticks an even lower common denominator? And then there's someone else that made a great analogy. This isn't StarCraft. Very few developers are limited by their APM throughput through the UI. Okay, fine. And then a very Hakan Newsy comment, a very hardcore one. Even your terminal emulator is a GUI app itself. Don't say you're not using a GUI app unless you boot to a command line interface directly. Come on. I mean, it is kind of true, right? But I got some street cred. I got a Vim tattoo. Not that bad, right? I might not boot to a command line interface directly, but this is kind of good. Sorry? Yeah, I mean, that's why I had to learn, I couldn't quit, so I couldn't be fired. I had to write some code. So now let me start with a hot take alert and actually start with the real content of this talk and say that GUIs are bloatware. Luckily, I have time enough to make this a more nuanced argument. So actually, I think that GUIs are bloatware, but I don't think they're bloatware because their creators decide to make them bloatware. I think they're bloatware because of the very nature of GUIs. Because it's very, very hard to develop a GUI, right? Because when you're developing a GUI, because it's so hard to integrate with other programs, because you have to worry about every single thing that your user is going to do, you need to build in all those features. And that causes GUIs to be bloatware, because they need to know too much about who's going to use them and how they're going to use them, because they cannot communicate. It's kind of like old school Microsoft programs, right? As Doug McElroy said, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft programs have intimate, one might say promiscuous knowledge of each other's internals. In UNIX, one tries to design programs to operate not specifically with each other, but with programs as yet unthought of. So we do this, we're able to do this in the Unix clause, because we have a universal interface, which makes it very easy for programs to communicate. And we should use it. We should write programs to handle text streams, because that is a universal interface. And because you have the universal interface, instead of trying to build in all those features, instead of trying to think of all that in advance, you build small programs because they can communicate. You can let that to your users, especially because we're talking about engineering. So you worry about writing programs that do one thing and that do it well, instead of making programs that do everything, especially because they can communicate. Because we have this very well-defined, this very elegant and simple interface for them to communicate. We worry more about writing programs that work together, instead of making a big program that tries to do everything on its own. So more CLIs actually mean less software. And less software is good, right? Less software means less time fixing things, less time debugging things, less time thinking about them. Right? Less software is very good. I want to live in a world with less software. I mean, I know that's our job, right? But the thing is, there's only one thing better than less software. And the only thing that's better than less software is no software at all. Right? I mean, the more you can accomplish with the least code. I mean, that's efficiency, right? You're not paid to write code. You're paid to solve problems. You're paid to generate value, right? So less software is good. So GUIs, well, GUIs are limiting, as we've seen. So in the same way that the creators of GUIs have to think of everything that you're going to do in advance, you're also limited by what they taught in advance. Right? If they didn't think of something you might want to do, well, you're going to have a very, very hard time doing it. They're also not scalable. So the more you do things on a GUI, well, you don't get significantly better at it. I'm not even talking about scalability in terms of like performance. I'm talking about scalability in terms of you doing tasks better, you doing tasks quicker, or you doing tasks with less effort. So when you use a CLI, you can always find out about new options, or if you already know a certain tool, you can just toggle a few options or toggle it in a certain way or combine it with tools you already know, because you already know those comments, because you use them very often, and therefore it scales better with your skills. Sorry, do you have some water, by the way? Because I'm really...
I'll get you some.
Oh, thank you very much. Because I was sick this weekend, so... Well, they're also very hard to integrate. Because, have you ever tried to, get the output of a GUI and put it in another program? Isn't it very annoying? You have to export it to a file, or I don't know, copy it somehow, find a way of doing it. It's just not native. It's very hard to make these programs talk to each other, which is the very reason why they're bloated, as we've seen. They're also hard to automate, right? I mean, if you're going to write a script, you're using CLI, just use them, it's just easier. And because you're doing that already, it's very easy to port to whatever environment you need. Right? It's very easy to migrate that to, I don't know, to a CI pipeline, or if you're using someone else's machine, like if you're pairing with someone, right, and they use a text editor you don't like, Atom, sorry. Basically, what you can do is you can just open a terminal. I was sick. So you can just open a terminal, fire up Vim, and do whatever you need to do. Or Emacs. It's fine. So basically, those are the reasons why I don't like GUIs. But there are things that GUIs are good for, right? I'm not saying that you should use Photoshop, as a CLI or anything like that. If you tried, that's fine. I don't think it was a very nice experience, to manipulate images using text. You should use a GUI when you need a GUI, right? When you need to use Photoshop, that's not what I'm advocating for here, okay? So GUIs are good for tasks such as discoverability, for non-repetitive tasks, and for dealing with multimedia, right? So these things, they're not always things we need, right? To be honest, there are things we need, not very often. Discoverability, do we really need to be exploring menus and finding out what we want to do with a certain piece of code, or something like dragging sliders, or, I don't know, manipulating things somehow? That's not something we do very often, right? Non-repetitive tasks. Now you might think, oh, but I automate everything. Right, but also for you to automate everything, you probably need to write a script, don't you? And maybe your tasks are not repetitive in intent. Maybe you're always doing a different thing, but the nature of the task is the same. Everyone needs to convert files, move files here, move files there, replace a certain bit of text, or change, I don't know, like the format of text or things like that. So maybe if you use the CLI, we would find ways to do those tasks using that same tool, like just toggling a few options or combining it with tools you already know. And okay, this one is fair enough. I mean, if you're a front-end developer, especially because, in a JavaScript meetup, I do use a browser. I use Vimium on that browser though. But yeah, this is fair enough. I don't think I need to explain that, if you need to use Photoshop, just use Photoshop. So now I think I can safely say that GUIs are bloatware for what we do as engineers most of the time, right? Not saying that all GUIs are bloatware. I'm saying that some GUIs are bloatware for some of the things that we do very frequently. So this is actually a question which is more about language, which is more about the symbols we share and how we share them. Like in Photoshop, it makes sense to use a GUI because you're dealing with visual abstractions, right? That's the language that the program's talking to you with, right? So you do need sliders, you need to see things happening, you need to have that discoverability, right? You need to be able to play with things in the same language as the software is telling you. While if you're talking to, I don't know, if you are writing code, it's easier to communicate in a structured text language. It's just about the symbols you share with the problem domain that you're manipulating. So this is really more of a communication problem than a technology problem. And language is something very difficult to get right. As Marcel Duchamp said, as soon as we start putting our thoughts into words and sentences, everything gets distorted. Language is just no good. I use it because I have to, but I don't put any trust in it. We never understand each other. Every conversion is kind of lossy, right? So if you choose the wrong abstraction, you lose even more information and it gets harder to communicate. So in fact, this is all about speaking the same language. It's more about shared abstractions, about more precise vocabulary, and about making things less magic. And that's my problem with IDEs. You press buttons and too many things happen. And when things go wrong, you usually get a terminal output. So if you're already used to that, it makes things a lot easier to debug because you know what's happening in the background. Right? There's no magic. You know what's happening behind the hood. And once you know that, it's fine to automate things. It's actually, you should automate things, but you should be conscious of what's happening so that you can debug it and so that you can understand what your machine is telling you. If you're always dealing with images and buttons, you will lose part of the context, part of the meaning. It makes things harder to understand. And now the how. So how do I do it? Well, I use a bunch of tools. These are the three main ones I would recommend for anyone starting out. So, sorry. So I will start with Zosh, or Z-shell, or whatever you call it. So Z-shell is just a shell. But okay, what is a shell? Well, not this shell, right? This shell. So a shell is just a user interface for you to communicate with the operating system. It's just a program, right? A shell is nothing but a program, right? Bash is a program, sh is a program, Z-shell is a program, fish is a thing, is also a program. So all of these, they're just programs for you to interact with your machine. And it's very important to differentiate what this is from what the terminal emulator is and what the terminal is. So in that post, someone also said, oh, you're not using a real terminal, are you? I'm like, yeah, I couldn't be born before 95, I'm sorry. So basically, the terminal is the real thing, the real terminal where you go and type things. There's a terminal emulator, which emulates the real thing, which is the thing I use. By the way, I use iTerm. I've heard that the native Mac terminal is quite good. So I've been thinking about switching. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe you need one less tool. That's great. And then there's the shell, which is Z-shell. So basically, Z-shell runs inside a terminal emulator, which emulates the real thing. And this is kind of how it works. So basically what happens is your keyboard provides input to your emulator, and it gives feedback to your monitor. And your emulator communicates with programs through something we call the TTY driver, which I'll not go into detail here. Basically, those arrows you see there, they're just streams passing data back and forth, the standard output, standard error, standard input. I've written a whole blog post about this, going in quite a lot of detail. So if you want to know more, just go and read that. That's like very, 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 very long, which is why I'm not going to do this to you tonight. No worries, you're welcome. Okay, but why do I use Z shell? Well, you can just try using SH and you can feel the difference. I think it's going to be quite painful. I don't recommend. But Z shell is quite nice. I quite like the auto-completion features. There's many plugins that are very, very useful, Git plugins. There's also, besides that, especially Z. Z is a very good plugin. And it's just very easy to manage your configuration. It's just very nice, and it does everything I need. Very extensible. And, well, there's a check noise phrases plugin, which you can pipe into Calsay, which is quite nice. And to manage my configuration, I use on my Zosh, which is pretty much standard. So if you just go on GitHub, you find plenty of information. Their repo is quite good. If you have any questions, not only about on my Zosh, about Zosh as well. I don't think anyone cares. So yeah, if you just go there, it's quite a lot of resources that are very, very good. So next thing on my list is Tmux, terminal multiplexer, which is really just a fancy name for something that makes your windows split and gives you a bunch of tabs and stuff. It does more than that, actually. So Tmux allows you to create sessions, and you can attach or detach to those sessions because it keeps just a server running with those sessions. So basically what I do is, like, if I'm going to work, I have a session for work, then I go to home, I detach from that session, and my terminal goes completely blank, and I can create a new session for whatever I'm working with at home. Or if I'm going to start a new blog post, I'll just start a new session, and I can just switch from context to context by detaching and attaching to sessions. So this is how it works. This is a very basic overview. So there's a server which keeps those sessions always running. It also keeps the layout of your panes, your windows, like everything stays exactly the same. So when you detach, it's like it's gone from a terminal, but it still exists somewhere, somewhere. So basically, those sessions are stored in the server, so you can attach and detach from them. And then there's panes, which are just like tabs, which keeps your windows, which actually contains the instances of the shell, which is running. So these are a bunch of Tmux plugins that I use. Not going to go over all of them again. You're welcome. I do recommend Tmux Resurrect and Tmux Continue just to persist your sessions and make sure you're not going to lose them. And just, the other ones are mostly for making things pretty and impressing your friends. The Tmux Spotify one is quite good because you can know what's playing while you write code, which is very, very useful sometimes. There's also a command line interface for Spotify, which I kind of like. It's very nice. And then there's Vim. Do you have Vim users here today? Nice, nice. So Vim is my text editor of choice. It's harder because it's different, but it's also better because it's different. I actually don't use Vim. I use nvim, which is just a continuation extension of Vim. Mostly because it has better support for asynchronous tasks, which I heard Vim 8, I think, has, but I haven't tried out yet. So basically, what would happen before is I would save a file in Vim, syntax checks would run, type checks would run, things would just like stop working for a while, they just freeze, and that's because it was running everything on a single thread. So with nvim, that doesn't happen anymore, which is quite nice. There's also a better alternative for scripts, which if you have ever tried to write something in VimL, it's very painful. So that's much, much better. And you might say, that doesn't matter, right? Well, I think it actually matters because it's not about writing code fast. And now you might argue, I'm most of the time thinking, I'm not most of the time writing code. But the thing is, you always have to keep those thoughts in your head while you're writing one. So the quicker you can write your thoughts, the better, right? It's about writing thoughts faster. It's about taking those things out of your head and putting them out as soon as possible so that you can keep code as close to your ideas as possible. It's about reducing drudgery. Because editing code is, it's not your main goal, right? I mean, your main goal is thinking and solving the problem, putting that down. You want to have more time to think and less time to actually type. So if you have something that allows you to do things very quickly, which allows you to automate lots of tasks, which allows you to customize your workflow to optimize it so that you can spend more time thinking. That's a lot better. And it's also about not using a mouse. It's more ergonomic. It's very, very nice to be able to type and have everything at the reach of your fingers. It just makes you very, very fast. And it's pleasant. It makes me happy as a developer. So a few tips to become a pro. It actually takes time. I've been doing it for 4 years, and I'm quite quick. But every single day I discover something new. Like really, you never stop learning new things. It's just amazing. So the first tip is Vim Tutor. So this one's quite basic. So whenever you have some free time, like 10-15 minutes, just type in Vim Tutor, and you have some text you can edit, which is going to have instructions for you to edit using Vim. So basically, it's going to open a text file in Vim, and this text file says, here's how you do things. And then you do things. And it's very, very helpful. Next step is to do things the Vim way. And by this, I mean disable your arrow keys, okay? Not even in insert mode. That's the first thing I've done when I installed Vim. A friend of mine said, if you use arrow keys, you're never going to learn. And then the first thing I did was to disable arrow keys in any mode possible. And I learned. So I guess it worked. So do disable arrow keys. Disable support for the mouse. Do things how Vim wants you to do things. Right? Learn the entry patterns. If you're pressing a key more than twice in Vim, you're doing something wrong. There's a better way to do it. More than twice, wrong. Imagine me screaming in your head, more than twice, wrong. Don't do this. Go vanilla. Don't try too many plugins. So this is very related to the previous topic. So Vim, most of the times people install plugins to do things that Vim can do. So you're just adding bloatware to your Vim, really, and that's the thing we're fighting against, right? We don't really want to make Vim an IDE. We just want to make Vim better for what we use. So we can customize it, and it's very good to have plugins. I do use plugins, but I just don't use too many. I try to go as vanilla as possible and learn how Vim wants me to do things. How to use panes, how to set configuration flags myself, so that when I'm in another machine, I can do things properly. And everything. So just go vanilla. Don't try too many plugins at first. Then always ask yourself if there's a better way to do things. Because secret, in Vim, there always is. Always. Always. Okay. And then resist the urge to quit. Which is very easy because no one can do it anyway. Right? But I'm going to teach you, right? Okay. The question you were all waiting for, this is the answer you wanted, and this is the answer I'm going to give you. Good. No one will be trapped. Hopefully you will not use this command. Hopefully you won't. No, wait, don't spoil the talk. Come on. Because, when things don't work, you do whatever you do when things don't work. You scream with them. And then eventually they work. Just append this the symbol next to it. And this is because Vim is your friend, right? When you type something in, Vim will say, don't quit. You're gonna lose. You're gonna lose your work. Vim is like your friend. He's saying like, yeah, this is what Vim is saying to you. Vim is telling, no, you're gonna lose this. Be careful. And then you might decide to scream with Vim. But Vim was just trying to be your friend. Remember this. Vim always wants to be your friend. So a few of the plugins I use. So I do use Nerd3. I like it, not really for manipulating files, but because the visual structure of files and how they're nested helps me a lot to understand how the project is set up. I use FZF, which is very good for finding files. I used to use Ctrl-P, but that's just too slow. And also FZF is very nice because it allows you to choose which file finder you're going to use behind the hood. So I tend to use AG with it, which is super fast, I'm going to talk about in a bit. I use Ematch because I write quite a lot of markup, so that makes me quite fast. I use Ale. This is not alcohol related. This means asynchronous linter engine, which is a lot less exciting, I'm sorry. It basically allows you to have one single plugin for linting, for formatting. So basically, if you're using JavaScript, for example, you can just say, oh, just use my ESLint configs and just use Prettier to format my files, and you don't need to be installing like a plugin for Prettier, a plugin for ESLint, or whatever you're using. Then there's NeoMake, which is just like make but asynchronous for NeoVim, so that you can have your tests like type checking, like syntax checking running asynchronously, and Vim won't freeze. And then just use your language-specific plugins. If you're using JavaScript, do download JavaScript plugins. If you're using Go, do download Go plugins. If you're using PHP, I'm sorry, no, just kidding. Just use plugins for whatever language you're using. And then some general tips and references. So dot files, be very gentle to them, like keep them in a nice shape, publish them to GitHub, and also keep an eye on other people's dot files. You will learn a lot about how people do things, how they like to work, and about the workflow in general. Try to do more using less, so don't try to use too many tools. Like try to learn the tools you already have. Try to optimize for using as few tools as possible in the best way possible. Learn one trick at a time. These things take time, and when you start out, you will want to quit. Now you know how, but it does take time. So if you stick to it, if you devote a bit of time every day, I'm sure things will be easier and hopefully quite nice. Automate everything. I don't think I need to explain this one, do I? Then another quite nice tip that I've seen these days on how can use is do nothing scripts. So basically there are scripts you just print what you have to do to the terminal and you do it manually. So you can automate them gradually. You have repetitive tasks that you always know, like, oh, what's the next step? And if something is easy to automate, you just go and automate it straight away, and you know what you need to automate. And the very nice thing about them is because you know how many times you run commands on terminals, you can just see a count of how many times you're doing certain tasks, and you know, like, oh, this task is more valuable for me to automate. And learn the fundamentals, learn about streams, learn your way around the terminal, learn how to use sed. Sed is nice. Sed is your friend. Regular expressions. So nice. So, just a few things that you should learn. Learn how to manipulate streams. Sed, as I've said. Oh, sed is like so nice, really. I'm a really big fan of sed. AG. So you can find files super, super quick with AG. I think it stands for the Silver Searcher. I think this is the symbol for silver in the table of elements. I'm not pretty sure, but there's AWK. Basically, you can just pick whatever information you need in those columns and pass it in a very nice way to whatever program you're going to manipulate them with. Curl, which is very nice and plays very well with JQ, which allows you to manipulate JSON data. So curl and JQ play really, really nice together. If you have REST API, for example, as many people raised their hands before. Make has been around since forever, right? Make is older than I am. Right? So, just Make allows you to do so many things. There's so many open source projects, even in JavaScript, that still use Make because Make is elegant, Make is simple. There's also a legend. I think, do I have time for a legend? It's just 2 minutes. So there's a legend that once, okay, I'm gonna be quick. So once someone wrote, sorry. So once someone wrote a Make file, and then all other Make files were copied from that Make file. And there were just subtle changes. So all Make files have one single descendant. Then there's Chrome. So just Chrome's also like learn how to schedule tests. Like it's very simple. It's always there. It's your friend. Vimium. So you can use a browser without a mouse. Very, very nice. And just read the manual. So reading the manual is like so useful. I know it sounds intimidating at first when you type man comment and then all the huge wall of text appears in front of you, and you're like, oh God, this is hard. But once you learn how to read that and to interpret it in the correct way, it just makes things so much easier to learn. So here are my dot files. If you want to see how I work and how I do things, they're very, very minimal. I try to keep them as vanilla as possible because I don't like to use many plugins, and I like to be good to go in whatever machine I use. In a risky situation, if I'm in, I don't know, whatever I am, I can just grab whatever machine and solve a problem. That's very good. There's a few blog posts I've written. Just go to lucasfcost.com. They're all there. They're quite long, but I think they're very fun to read. There's this blog by Tom Ryder, which is super good, which is called Arabesque. So this guy talks a lot about the terminal, about tools, about Vim, about anti-patterns, regular expressions, very, very nice things. And that's pretty much it. You can tweet at me at the Wizard Lucas, or you can follow me on GitHub, or just you can find me around. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.